I'm Deirdre Fay, and I'm here talking to Graham Music. I'm so happy to be here at the Tavistock Clinic. And Graham is somebody I've known about for years and read both his books, or you should definitely get it. It's a wonderful overview of the whole field of attachment. He works with children, adults, adolescents,
Yep.
every which way. So one of the things, Graham, I really wanted to look at, how do you hold such a positive approach when working with such complicated trauma and attachment issues?
Okay, well, I think you can have a positive approach to experiencing things which are really awful, I think. So I'm in the Tavistock Clinic, the home of psychoanalysis and attachment theory, and we don't here believe in things being too nicey-nicey. So I think the biggest part of our work probably is bearing and being in touch with and staying with most complicated, difficult states of mind, states of feeling, states of body. And that would include in ourselves. So if we're working with somebody who's highly multiply traumatised or traumatising, often we'll have all kinds of feelings that get evoked in us. We might feel furious, angry, upset, disgusted, but actually opening up to the fact that those states of feeling and mind and body will be meaningful will then take us into another place from which we can reflect and process and metabolize those feelings and try to make some sense of them, in order that that making sense of will be what ultimately is what helps the people we work with.
And you have that phrase that I love so much, prime for goodness.
Yes, well, we are primed for goodness, we're also primed for badness, in the sense that depending on what kind of environment we happen to be in, so if we're living in an environment where there's lots of kindness and generosity and thoughtfulness around, then the parts of our brains and bodies that can be open to goodness, kindness, generosity, compassion, altruism are much more likely to come online. Those sort of body states, if you like, the areas are in the autonomic nervous system, ventral vagus system, etc. But in psychoanalysis, we think about this as having a good internal object. So what we're thinking about is these states of mind and body that become internalized, so that we have a predisposition. So some people have more of a predisposition for this than others because of their early experiences, but also because of your immediate environment. So what I see time and time again is work with people who have been severely maltreated, and often they end up being quite hard to like because they've done horrendous, difficult to think about things. And as they make progress in their treatment, and as they begin to feel better about themselves, and as they begin to trust in other people and themselves a little bit more, we see an increase in their sense of well-being, and then they become nicer people. I find myself liking them much more. The people around them find themselves liking these people who were difficult to like much more. They start doing nicer things.
And they like themselves more.
Because they like themselves more, exactly.
Right,
That's exactly, yeah.
Isn't that something?
It really is, I think. So I think we've all got this potential. And obviously we're all if we're living in an environment which is very stressful, stress-inducing, anxiety-provoking, traumatising, etc., then those parts of our personality tend to go much more offline, inevitably. And that will be true of every single one of us, and that's just keying into the systems that evolution has helped us by putting in place so that we can cope with stress. So, a classic example, I had to give this talk about altruism, and I was going to present myself as a very thoughtful and reflective, and I was late coming back from the airport, and the plane landed in the wrong place, and I had to rush for the train for the interview, and I was rushing past people with my elbows out, pushing them out of the way, on the way to talking about being nice. But I was and I have to forgive myself because I was just multiply stressed because I thought I was going to miss this interview. And we know this from social psychology that stress does give rise to a turning off of the more kind, compassionate, generous parts of our personality temporarily, or for some people it hasn't really come online properly in the first place because they haven't had enough good early experience. And many of us working with developmental trauma see this time and time again. We see kids and adults who can't trust that. They don't know it in themselves. In fact, they don't know it in somebody else. And classic example would be an adoptive child who's very benign, kind adoptive mother comes over to them to, say, brush their hair. And the child will shrink back and then attack because their expectation is of there being very little that's good and benign in the world.
So what would be like one or two things somebody that they could work on themselves to help cultivate or to move toward? What do you find is there a general
You talking about
go-to strategy to something to cultivate?
clients or therapists? Are you talking?
Well, maybe both, right?
Um,
But let's start with clients. Somebody who's working on themselves and
yeah.
doubting that they could ever be a good person or anyone would ever love them. What do they do in their dark moments?
Well, I think they've got to feel reached out to by us, really, and feel that they can be genuinely held in mind in a kindly way, if you like.
Right. And cared about.
And cared about, yeah. And understood, I think, deeply understood, even the things that they're ashamed of. I think that gives rise to such a sense of relief, and I think that's certainly one of the things I try to do for myself, actually, is that if we can be prepared to make sense of the things that we do and think and feel, instead of judging them as good or bad, that takes you into another zone. It takes you out of that sense of, well, there's always going to be a judgment, a criticism, or you're seeking praise or seeking other people's approval. It's this sense of quite a deep sense of being understood.
Even if you're understanding yourself, is what you're saying. First,
Yeah.
you need it from other people, really, to get that.
Yeah, well, as a child, you need it from other people. That's where it begins. But then what you get... oh dear.
That's deep.
Okay.
I like that picture. I'm going to leave that one on.
Okay, so...
So, well, because Fonagy talks about that, he says there's a biological need to be understood,
yeah.
is integrative, so that when we
Yes.
understand ourselves or somebody else gets us, somehow pieces come together.
I can't overestimate the importance of this concept of being held in mind, which sounds very nebulous. But if you've never had an experience of somebody holding you deeply in mind and knowing you, if a child doesn't know that their parents somewhere in the back of their mind is thinking about them and caring about them, even if they're not consciously in their mind, it absolutely is a felt experience, I think. Yeah, I think Fonagy, you're right, Fonagy does talk about this. He also talks about this concept of epistemic trust, which I think is really, really important. This sense you read the cues and clues from people to make sense of how trustworthy they are.
Right.
And then, if they do seem to be trustworthy, and you will then be able to trust their thoughts and ideas, then not only do you relax, but also you can take in what they've got to say. And so many of the kids and adults we work with have what Fonagy would call epistemic vigilance, which means that they don't trust. They've learned not to trust for very, very, very good reasons. They've learned that actually adults, you have to be quite wary of adults. You go along with them, you stay safe by making sure that you don't cross them in a way that they in terms of getting their disapproval, but you can't trust what they've got to say, what they think, what they feel, or that they're not going to necessarily do what they say they're going to do. So that epistemic vigilance then becomes part of the internal psychic structure, which will only change when they begin to develop trust from a genuine human relationship.